thank you. And I want to thank Sean Noriega, the comandante of this magnificent research center, and of course Lisette, the archivist and librarian, and Virginia, who really provoked the possibility of doing this presentation. Just let me say a few words about Ruben and then a little bit about myself so you can get an idea. I mean, it's been 42 years, so it's, you know, maybe if we have any recollection of the events, they're not all that clear. Ruben was an American a newspaper person, a very good newspaper person. And I think that's something that's very important, because remember, in those days, really a lot of our people did not have those credentials. Ruben did. He had a platform, the LA Times, and then he acquired a new platform, and that was the coming of Spanish language television, Univision. Remember, in those days, we really didn't have definition as a community. We really didn't have the images of our people in any significant way, but rather always in distortion or in just very, very limited ways. And so people didn't really know who this community was. Minorities were always the African Americans, which in fact they were. But a growing community was also developing around Los Angeles, not only in East LA, but all around Los Angeles. And it wasn't until the 60s, though, that people started taking note because of the activism of that same community. And so Ruben acquired absolute recognition. But Ruben's greatest work, I think, was always in the international bureau. Ruben started out in the early 60s in the LA Times, but he started in El Paso, where I'm from. I'm from El Juarez, El Paso. And same as Ruben. And Ruben went to Texas Western, which is the University of Texas at El Paso now, and became a journalist. But right off the bat, he started out in the investigation. He pretended he was drunk, got arrested, got taken into the jail, and then he did investigative reporting on all the corruption and drug selling that was going on. And he became an enemy of everybody, of the drug people and the corrupted police, so he got out of town. And he comes to California, and he hooks up with the LA Times in the early 60s. And, people claim that he was brought in by the LA Times for the purpose of being the Mexican on the time. But really he wasn't. I mean, if you look at all his work, really, Ruben does mostly work on Mexico. Very limited, quite a lot of his bylines really are quite limited. But he did a few articles on sort of cultural profiles in the early 60s, and then he did some very, very good work on the federal program, some articles that came out in that early period. He was not the first Chicano on the LA Times, people say he was. He wasn't. There was another gentleman there, Ricardo Vasquez. I don't know if any of you know Richard Vasquez. Richard Vasquez is an interesting person. I've never been able to give very much information, but he wrote a novel. It was already out at the time, Chicano. I don't know if you ever Chicano, the novel. That was the first time the word Chicano had ever come out in public, in a major publication, and Richard published it. So it's kind of interesting to see that there was another person there in the LA Times. But the LA Times was never a friend of the community. The LA Times really didn't have an audience in the Chicano community. It didn't have any subscriptions in the East LA Chicano community. It really wasn't read by the so-called Mexican community. If anything, probably the Herald at the time, but not really the time. You couldn't even buy it in anything. Maybe at East LA College, which is now Monterey Park College. We just pretend that it's East LA. It's now Monterey Park, unfortunately. So Ruben comes on board, and he doesn't always very happy to be the so-called Chicano. And we got the opportunity because hablaba español. He became the reporter, field reporter during the invasion of the Dominican Republic there, and he did great reporting. Oh my God, those artículos that are just very interesting. Who he almost gets killed. You begin to see right away something that may have provoked a little bit of angst on the part of authority figures here in Los Angeles. Ruben gave credibility to the common man. He wanted to tell the story, the complete narrative, rather than just simply accept the authoritative version. The policeman, the administrator, the politician, he would also then turn around and ask the student what would happen, what he would ask the worker, and that was interesting, because you begin to get a better profile of just the way people felt about things that were going around in their life. He did good work in the Dominican Republic, and I think people took note, and he took note that language was important, and that speaking Spanish was important, and for professionals that thought that they could abandon and forget their Spanish and they could do all right in English. Ruben no, Ruben era muy mexicano, and he was able to develop all his linguistics and use it to magnify his level of professionalism. Ruben also became involved in Vietnam. Did excellent work. He was in country for about almost a year in the An Lao Valley in Da Nang and in Bon Son. Really good work. Again, almost risking his life trying to get the full story of what's going on. Ruben was anti the war in Vietnam because it was very obvious a lot of good Americans, regardless of how activist they were, in fact, were against that criminal war that was taking place. Suffering of so many millions of Vietnamese people and the deaths of over 50,000 young Americans. So we probably died not really knowing why it was happening. And Ruben covered it, and a lot of people criticized him, but I thought really well-written articles. Ruben comes back and he becomes the head of the Mexico Bureau Chief in Mexico City. And during the time cuando Mexico estaba explotando with the great protests that were taking place in 1968 around the Olympics and then at Tlatelolco, Ruben almost got killed at Tlatelolco, very similar to the way he was killed in East LA, covering the story, having to duck into a building, barricade, people shooting, and Ruben writing about it. It was kind of interesting to read all that was taking place. Ruben was an American reporter. He was a very important person. And then he comes back. Basically in that same year of 1970, when you mentioned will get killed earlier in that year. And I think he becomes, after having such an exciting arena of work that he had, you know, in LA, and the stories weren't all that interesting, but he left. And where did he go? He became news director of this brand new experiment that was taking place, and that was Spanish language television, Univision. And regardless how you feel about that television station and any other, the fact of the matter is that these were the beginning of the real definition and communication and existence of a lot of our communities on a mass basis. Ruben became news director, and much to the chagrin of then station manager Daniel Villanueva, who was not at all of the same political persuasion, Republican, etc. But they began to cover stories, and they did really good work. For the first time, you saw television covering our community, and not just simply talking to the police, but talking to the teacher, talking to the student, talking to the parents. And that began to create a certain amount of concern among authority figures, because they couldn't tell their narrative. It was a narrative that had a greater dimension. And especially in one particular case when two young men from Mexico were there in downtown LA got killed by the LAPD, supposedly under the accusation that they were rapists. A young girl from San Leandro came down to LA and claimed that these two Mexicans had raped her, and et cetera, et cetera. And that was enough to provoke an attack on where these two young men lived, right there in the downtown apartment, in the Skid Row section. And the Sanchez cousins were shot dead, and for no reason. They didn't know what was happening, but they were killed, two of them, very young. And once again, they're illegal, they're criminal, they're Skid Row, and you know, all the ugly stuff is coming out. But Ruben did more than that, and he began to find, well, who are they? And he began to interview people that knew them, and then he went to Mexico and brought their parents, los abuelitos. And they found out that these were just two really good young men that were just killed for no reason at all. Unfair, without any type of warning. People, they knocked on the door and the answer go, and one cousin was killed, the other one saw that. He thought they were just assailant. He jumped out the door, out the window, and before he hit the window, he was also gunned down by people that were down in the alleyway. Ruben brought out the story, and he just brought it out by telling who these young men were. That, you know, just because they're undocumented, or at that time they were saying those illegales, they had no rights, you know, and they're probably criminals anyway, and that type of thing. But they weren't. They were workers, and they were good, and they supported their families. At any rate, a lot of sympathy, a new sort of a growing pressure on authorities. For the first time, LAPD folks were indicted, and they were going to stand trial, etc. First time. That caused authority, and Ruben wrote about it. You can see in one of his columns, he writes about how he was basically, police visited him and told him, you got to cut it out because you're creating a certain amount of concern, etc., etc. So that there was a notice on the part of police towards Ruben. Yes, Ruben, I think, was a threat because he exercised extremely powerful platforms. They're denied to just most of us, but especially to Mexicans. A voice in the LA Times, one of the most powerful newspapers in the world, and a voice in a very powerful medium, Univision TV. And he was very much a significant person in those arenas. And he was telling the complete narrative and the full story, and it was getting out. That's not to say that the Chicanos weren't. I was involved in Chicano media, the Chicano, my own. This was I had this little magazine, the newspaper, and before that, by the way, when I was an undergraduate at Cal State LA, I started out 2 newspapers, and the Inside East Side, and then also the Chicano Student Movement newspaper, and what I thought was important when kids didn't have anything to read. This was a period of time when you had a lot of underground press, the LA Free Press, remember? And there were at least 200 underground newspapers, really interesting stuff that wrote about the drug culture, that wrote about, all the social scene of that underclass of folks not in the mainstream, a lot of it, quite young. And I felt also that, our kids didn't have, especially the high school kids, didn't have anything. They really didn't, and maybe this is why sometimes they got lost, or they didn't think of themselves as having any value. So I wanted to write about things that affected their lives, and so we started out this little newspaper, and in the Inside East Side, we divided Los Angeles, especially the East Side, into various schools, and everybody had a high school they had graduated. I didn't graduate from a school from East Side. I'm from El Paso, and then when I came out, I lived in South Central, etc. But the only school that didn't have anybody covering it was Lincoln High School. I said, I'll cover it, I'll go. So I started going, and by covering it, I used to hang out in the corner and hustle kids. Hey kid, you want to buy a magazine? A newspaper, at that time it was a newspaper. I used to sell it for 10 cents. And it was amazing. I felt embarrassed. I felt, oh my God, how can you do this? You're a college student. Your mother's going to make, I was hustling kids for a newspaper. But you know what? The kids loved it. And all of a sudden, all these little kids come around, because we wrote about the drugs, we wrote about the music, we wrote about the war in Vietnam, we wrote about all the issues that were important to them, sex, everything. And the kids wanted to deal with it and talk about it. And pretty soon I had a whole group of kids in Lincoln High School, and they became sort of like my contacts, and not only to sell the newspaper, but also to bring information. And we began to right around that same neighborhood was La Raza people, crazy group of conspirators in a little church in Lincoln Heights, run by a very, very dedicated priest from a very international renowned family, the John Booth Luce family, Father Luce. Father Luce was the rector there at the Epiphany Church, and he was very open to supporting help in communications in youth organizations. Quite frankly, I think Father Luce, more than anything, was very much responsible for the impetus for the development, ultimately, of the Brown Berets, which came from a youth group called the YCCA, the Young Citizens for Community Action, which morphed into the Young Chicanos for Community Action, and all of it was coming out of that basement of that church. And I used to go there and I said, this is a weird group of people, but I was fascinated. I was fascinated with the way they talked, because I wasn't very political. but I was just interested, and I wanted to listen, I wanted to learn, and I began to sit down and try to understand a little bit better. Out of that group was the beginning of a newspaper called La Raza newspaper. I didn't think the newspaper was very good. I could do better, you know. So but I was interested in it, and with some other friends, we began to say, well, we can probably do a better job of reaching the kids, and that's when we started the Inside East Side. We visited La Raza, give us an idea, how do you put out a newspaper, and do this, and 10 minutes later, okay, that's it. And then we visited the other Free Press, well, how do you put out a newspaper, well, we can do this. And I think our lessons were about an hour, and then we started. That was the period of offset presses. We actually put out a little newspaper, relatively cheap, and we did. And it was the ugliest looking newspaper. Kind of embarrassed, but I was happy. You know, we had a newspaper, and I had a byline, etc. Anyway, I did that for a while, and then the walkouts happened in 1960. The walkouts didn't just happen. They really were organized, and there was a conspiracy of community and students and people from the universities and high schools and what have you. And the walkouts, we had articles going into the schools already provoking, directing, and advising students how to walk out. Boom, it happens in 68. And I remember at the time saying, I gotta have a camera with me. I'm not a camera guy, I'm not really a photographer. I was more than anything else a historian, and I was an undergrad history major, and at the same time, I really like to write and read, and even when I first started out, I said, no, a few years from now, nobody is going to believe what happened in these years. Las cosas que estaban pasando, the things of my life. And I had a daughter, and I wanted her to know what her father was, as crazy as he was. So I remember carrying a little Voigtlander with me, and with that little Voigtlander, I was the one that picked out, with no exception really, except for me, some pictures from the LA Times, the first walkouts of the kids coming out of Butler Lincoln, out of Roswell, etc. And it was an amazing thing that was happening, because you could see a community developing, a whole interest around these issues. And I continued to take pictures, and people started giving me cameras. I got calls from people in West LA, Raúl, I have this camera, you want it? Yeah. I thought I was being set up by somebody. One time there was somebody that lived in the canyons up in the mountains, and I have this expensive camera, I want to give it to you. I hope it's not an assassination or something. But for that camera, I'm going to go. and I got it. It was a very good. And so I did that, and then when the walkouts happened, I took all the pictures, and then I got very satisfied with the folks inside East Side. I thought they were talking to the police and criticizing me, and they were saying, even the police were telling me, you know what, you don't represent the community, you don't represent the inside East Side, and we know who you are, you're nothing but a troublemaker. I said, what are you talking about, you know? And then I found out, and I said, well, you know, me voy, I'm leaving. I'm not going to stay around with you, because you're not being truthful with me. And so I had all this photography, and I didn't want to go with La Raza, but I hung out over there. And then after a while, I put on what I call the CSM. So whenever you see pictures of the walkout, they're in the CSM. They're not in the inside side. They're not in the Raza. They were in the what I call the CSM, and then eventually I call it the Chicano Movement newspaper. And so I continue. And then later on, by 1969, I took over La Raza. La Raza, I remember, started out not by Chicanos. It started out by a Cuban guy, Alicia Risco, and Ruth Gibson. Ruth Gibson, a hard-working lady. She really was the heart and soul of La Raza coming out. She really was doing a majority of the work, and Chris was doing a lot of the theorizing. But nevertheless, La Raza came out, and then finally by '69, right before the big protest, August 29, I was pretty much in charge of La Raza, and kept it basically up until it folded in '77. So that's what I did, and then Ruben. Let me just say a little bit about what I think is very important in this one. Ruben Salazar is an important person. But as important as he was, there's so much mystery around him, especially the way he died. Ruben did not die the way the official story la historia oficial. The official story was a lie. And I said it so at the right time. I was there. I was from where I'm sitting right there to where the back row, that's where they were shooting into the bar. I was saying, why are they doing it? I was there before they came. There was no riot going on. There was nobody running around with guns. As a matter of fact, it was sort of like a resting area there. There had been problems at Laguna Park. There had been looting and burning on the boulevard. But remember, people make all this big thing about the riot and the looting. It really was minimal. I mean, the so-called burning and looting, the damage was about $350,000 worth of fires and damage, which was important compared to the damage caused in the Watts riots of 1965, a few years before. $35 million worth of 1965 dollars. The so-called riot and the so-called riot was very, very minimal. And I always thought it was kind of bogus, this whole issue, what's going on the boulevard. I saw a lot of kids helping and putting out fires, and yeah, I'm sure there was looting. But it was never that clear that in fact it was just a bunch of crazy Mexicans running around, etc. So I had my doubts about the validity of that whole. I know, for example, you'll see some of that in my little PowerPoint about what happened at Laguna Park, which I call the Battle of Laguna Park, La Batalla de Laguna, because it was an assault on the community. It was not a riot. It was organized, programmed assault on peaceful gatherers. I mean, and I'll show you exactly where the Green Mill liquor store, which provoked the whole incident. You know, the whole thing was that rioters come into this liquor store and they start ripping it off, and and out of that was provoked, and so therefore they had to go and disrupt the gathering that was there in the area near the baseball field, more towards Dittman, away about a block away from Whittier Boulevard. And I'll show you that this. So things happened, and I'm sure that there was a problem because the owner locked the doors, and then people were inside. They wanted to get out, they couldn't get out, and so there was some disturbance there, and I'm sure maybe something happened, and maybe people did throw rocks or whatever it was, and maybe people should have been arrested. But that Green Mill liquor store is about a half a mile from where the demonstrators were at, where we were at, where I was at, where my daughter was at. And we were sitting down beginning to enjoy after a hot walk and marching down to Laguna Park. And the demonstration, Rosalio had just started speaking. We had the kids dancing. It just started. Things happened at the liquor store, and then the police have to literally run over 2 blocks to get to us. I mean, there was no need for it. They just simply wanted to assault. I always believed they didn't want to see the growing activist movement in our community. You know, I don't think they did. I think they always thought they could sort of suppress the Chicano. They couldn't do very much about the African American, but the suppression of this group, and so they were going to try to keep it, I think, under some type of tight control. But it was growing, it was developing, especially with the good work of some of the young folks that were there, like Rosalio, formerly a UCLA student body president. I guess he learned that here at UCLA, how to organize riots, etc. But it did happen. But you know what? The police ran in and they started assaulting the people, and the people fought back. They did fight back, and I told that in the whole inquest. They tried to infer from my testimony that I was encouraging and supporting violence. And I said, no, it's not it. You know, when you assault a person, they have a right to defend themselves, and you know, and the people pick up a rock or pick up a stick to defend themselves. They have every right to do that. I don't care who you are. Nobody can violently assault another person and think they can get away with it. And if a Chicano assaults a police officer, he deserves to be arrested, etc. But if a police officer assaults a citizen, an individual, children, women, which is what they did, they have a right to defend themselves with whatever force is necessary to stop that violence. And that means you pick up a stick or a rock or whatever, you do it. And they did. And people fought back, and they did. They started throwing tear gas at the people picked up the tear gas, threw it back at them. They picked up sticks, and then all during the inquiry. And did you see Chicano picking up rocks? I said, yeah. Did you see them throwing a rock? Yep. Did you see them using a stick? And you bet, absolutely. Why do you think they did it? They were defending themselves. That's what they were doing. And if that happened today, and you started doing the same thing, I'd pick up a stick and hit you with it. It was a crazy inquest. I mean, child, you know, disruptions, people walking. I think you were probably there and Oscar was this crazy. The lawyer was running around yelling and screaming, and I was telling them that, you know, you people are being biased. None of that had to do with the death of Ruben Salazar, by the way. I kept trying, what does all this have to do with Ruben Salazar? This is an inquest to the murder of Ruben, or the death of Ruben Salazar. And all you're doing is showing all this, and of course, the official version was a bunch of Maoists and communists and crazy Mexican rioters, and we provoked it. I think the whole idea was to sort of shroud what was going to happen with violence. A young 15-year-old boy, in Ward, in Cecil Ward, what's his name? Lynn Ward supposedly was killed. Somebody threw a tear gas projectile. I investigated his death. Not true. Lynn Ward was taken to the hospital. He was injured. Something happened to Lynn. But this whole business of some tear gas, what happened to Lynn, by the time he got in the hospital, his head was full of contusions. Like, como que si alguien le había dado macanazos, you know these zappers? Have you ever been hit with a zapper? I was during some of the quiz. These zappers are horrible pain. Boom, and they hit you in the head. Apparently, this young boy's head was full of these things. And what happened to Lynn Ward? The argument was that somehow he was blown off by a tear gas projectile. I never bought it. Another young man was killed, Angel Diaz, Jose Angel Lara, and Diaz. Supposedly he ran a barricade. All I investigated that one. It's not true. Not true. And I have the pictures, and I have that thanks to the good work of bringing some of the records from the sheriff department. The death card, how Angel died. Supposedly he was driving. Well, no, because the blood is on the passenger side. Plus, he was shot from behind, and he was not shot on Willie Boulevard. So a lot of things were going on. Ayawa. Okay. Tequila. Angel was shot, and he was killed. And we know very little about Angel, but he certainly was not killed the way police said. And then we come down to the issue of Ruben Salazar. ¿Por qué murió? Why did he die? I never bought it. I never accepted it. And let me just read to you a little bit about what happened. What I have done, I've researched so much this whole issue. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a mystery. There is a lot of research that can be done. First of all, there's a lot of newspaper accounts, and people should read the newspaper account, the Daily Times, the Herald, the East Side Journal, the Lincoln Heights Bulletin, the Free Press. There's a whole battery of newspapers that are there with people telling their stories, and so you can get good information on there. There are FBI files. There are eyewitness reports, people that were there. There was, and most important of all, there was an inquest, a coroner's inquest. Over 55 people, around 20 of them right there at the Silver Dollar Cafe, around 10 inside the Silver Dollar. I used to wonder, why don't we know more about what happened inside the Silver Dollar? Supposedly a tear gas was shot into the bar and somehow killed. No. Something must have happened in the bar. And we know a lot happened in the bar. I know a lot of what happened in the bar. I looked at the testimony. The good thing about that inquest, remember, an inquest inquest testimony is not binding to serve as indictment, but it is sworn testimony. and can be used by the district attorney to maybe call for a jury, or a trial, or something investigate, which is what I always wanted. In any case, there were approximately 10 people inside that bar that gave testimony of what happened, what they saw, what they heard, what they saw Ruben do, what they saw Ruben say. We know what some of his last words were. We know what happened to him. How did he die? According to the eyewitnesses. I never believed that Ruben was killed by a tear gas projectile. And you'll see, these are mammoth bazooka shells. Literally around this long, this wide, supposed to hit him in the head and traversing his head and coming out. I never accepted that. It was preposterous. What is this, head made out of butter or what? You know? I mean, you get hit by a 45 shell in the head, half your head's going to blow off. Your arms, you know, a little bullet, powerful. Ruben's killed with this wall-piercing. Remember, the tear gas projectile that hit Ruben could go through a wall and then spew the gas out on the other side. And supposedly this is what hit him and this is what killed him. No, that's a fairy tale. Everybody bought it for some reason. We were in such a hurry to make a martyr of this man. That's not true. And I said, and the next day, I said, lo mataron, they killed him. And I don't totally know how, but he was not killed by a tear gas projectile. That's preposterous, that's nonsense. And I saw Ruben when he was laying in the wake. Ruben era un hombre bien plantado, a man guapo, sort of barrel-chested, middle in the prime of his life. He was 42 years old, and he was always well coiffured and muy profesional. And when he laid there in the coffin, he looked exactly like this, like this. After having your head destroyed by a bazooka shell, even the daughter was saying, our dad looked exactly like he looked when he was alive. Something else happened to Ruben. Remember the initial reports that came out that he was killed by snipers. The initial reports was snipers killed Ruben. And that's one of the reasons why the whole argument, we have to get into the Silver Dollar because a man with a gun. And that Ruben lay there because he was probably assassinated by a sniper. And guns were found near the Silver Dollar. Well, yeah, but who had the guns? Daniel Rivera, who owned the wig shop next to the Silver Dollar. When all the barullo was happening, Daniel came with a gun and said, I'm the owner of the shop, I keep this, I have a license, I have it for my shop. You should not think that this is a weapon and I want you to keep it. Well, later on they were saying a man with a gun was found near the Silver Dollar. Amazing stuff. Later, Pete Hernandez called the sheriff's department. I have a shotgun in the Silver Dollar. I want to take it out, but I want a deputy there with me, and I want to give it to him because I do not want people saying that, you know. And he did. He later went into the bar through the back side. They took out the shotgun and they handed it to the sheriff. Later on, guns were taken out of the Silver Dollar. It was amazing the way the distortion was happening. So Ruben was and the crew. Remember, Ruben had a crew of Guillermo Restrepo, usually the interviewer, and Chapo, extraordinary. Chapo was very much the person, the camera guy, who really was the one who shot all that good footage at Laguna Park that later became a film, Rick and Twain, out of which you see some of that. That's all Chapo's work. Too bad that Chapo has passed away. And two of his friends in Colombia, and they were there. And they were there at the march. They were there at the park. And then later they were there out in the Silver Dollar Cafe. Ruben approached the Silver Dollar Cafe right around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Myself, Joe Rasso, and a few other people were about 2 minutes behind them. Ruben and his crew approached the Silver Dollar. It was open, it was doing business. This was a staging area. The J&S hamburger stand was open, the discount record shop was open, the jewelry store was open. It really wasn't, yeah, there had been a fire at the Bell Plastics building, but there were firemen and there were civilians and there were deputies, and the hamburger stand was selling hot dogs, they were selling hamburgers and soda, and everybody was, I bought a soda there at the time. Ruben gets in, they look around, they make the decision to walk in. Ruben would never walk out. Ruben walks into the bar approximately around 5 o'clock. Right around that time, deputies begin to come almost immediately. I happened to be right across the bar myself and Joe. I had gone to the J&S hamburger stand, and from there, as I was buying the hamburgers, you can see some of the deputies already congregating there on Laverne. You see with their shotguns. And I said, this is weird. I didn't know what was going on, but I took their pictures, and they're there. And this is before they approached the Silver Dollar Cafe. You see, it's right there in the middle of the top. That's right there. That's Thomas Wilson and Grasser. Those are all the people who would later go to the Silver Dollar. And they're there already congregating. And then what begins to happen almost immediately, Ruben goes into the Silver Dollar. They immediately sit. Imagine this is the door right here. Ruben walks in. This is the bar. These are the seats. Ruben and Chop immediately sit down right in front, right here. Probably no more than 5 feet away from the entrance of that horrible entrance. They're right there. And here's the bar. Almost immediately, Ruben says, well, we have a beer, and by the way, they have a restaurant. And then Amanda, the waitress, comes by and gives a beer. He begins to say, do I know you guys? I've seen you before. Yeah, well, she saw Guillermo because he was on TV every night for the news. And they have chit-chatting, and Ruben says, well, where's your restaurant? And it's in the back. And so Ruben goes to the back, and he walks, and he thinks